Today I'm going to kickstart the industry in this Cities Skylines 2 build, and I'm going to show you how I've done it. Rather than using the generic industry, I'm going to use some careful placement of specific warehouse and industry assets to create a cool looking shipyard build. It's going to include some big warehouse assets, wet docks, a dry dock. We'll use the custom car park functionality to extend the bigger warehouse part of the build and fit it in seamlessly into the surroundings. There'll be plenty of repeated assets to give that more realistic look, and of course there'll be plenty of props and detailing to create little pockets of interest and achieve some added realism. To help you guys out, I'll try and shout out the props to search for if you're using dev mode yourself, just as I'm going along. I'm sure I won't manage to get everything in, but I'll do my best to get in as much as possible for you guys. So the very first thing we need to do here is the layout, where we're going to create the edge of the development. I prefer to use the small avenues for industry areas personally. I think it looks best up against the water's edge as well. Everything we draw out here will be converted to a key wall with the road tool mod. Very easy to do. Once the initial layout's done, we can kind of mark out where we want to create the docks as well. With the initial layout in place, it's just a case of going around each road that will be touching the water directly, and then we'll be converting it into a key wall. With that all done, I'd like to create a bit of a frame to build around once we get into the building placement. Now I'm going to run a few train tracks along a couple of the docks. They can't function sadly, but they certainly do add to the overall look of the build, so they're definitely worth putting in. Now I want to get some of the bigger assets in place, and I'll start with the cargo harbour warehouse. If you're doing this yourself, you're going to have to line up the main asset, so the main asset being the actual harbour. So line that up before selecting the upgrade asset, so the upgrade asset being the warehouse from the dev tool, as you can't rotate the upgraded asset unfortunately. So it's a little bit finicky, but it's an easy enough workaround. So with Anarchy on, it's just a case of lining the main asset up to the road and plopping it on, and you can create a bigger single warehouse by plopping another one right next to it or giving it a bit of an overlap. So in this video we're going to stitch 3 of them together, and we're going to create a big L-shaped warehouse, which is kind of nice. The cargo rail warehouse is up next. I had to play about with it, it didn't overlap well, so I decided to place them next to each other with a little road in between, and it looked pretty good. The game automatically gave us different coloured props on these ones as well, so that worked out pretty nicely. I've started a little section of repeating the smaller assets here, or the smaller warehouses rather, and it really does give the look of a development that was built at the same time. There's a couple of ways of getting the colour you want before planting it. You can either plop it down away from the building area until you get the colour that's desired, or you can use the Bulldozer tool method. So once you have the asset selected, just press B on your keyboard twice. It will deselect and automatically reselect the asset without you plopping it, but it will cycle the colours when you're doing that. So that Bulldozer method's definitely the quickest way of doing it. After I figured that out, I sort of instantly forgot how to do it, and I was back plopping later on the build. I should really just write these things down, shouldn't I? The last of the big assets to get in now are the car parks, and we'll detail some of these later, and the rest of the waterside buildings. The first here, again, we'll use the same technique to create a bigger asset. So we're just selecting the same agricultural asset, same colour, we'll give them a slight overlap, and that will create a nice big custom waterside building. It looks good, that. For the final docks, I'm just going to keep it simple. We're going to add a little bit of uniformity here and just use the same small asset, and we'll create a couple of rows. Alright, so let's have a look at what we got so far. I like the overall shape at this point. The big warehouses give a nice focal point, don't they? And they work really well against the road and the rail networks. Once the water's brought up to the key walls, it'll really give a good contrast. I wanted to make sure that I am happy with all the roads coming off the key walls at this point, as it can be a pain amending these later on. But yep, I think we're good in that regard. So on that note, let's crack on with the next stage of the build, getting the smaller assets in and getting the terraforming done. The first thing I want to do is get the custom car park in. This won't be its final form, there's a lot of detailing to be done, but given that this is the first time I've used the car park facilities in dev mode, I want to get the pathing in, and I want to make sure it'll all fit nicely before moving on. So in the dev mode, you want to look for this road, just search for invisible, you'll find it on the list. I'm going to use the surface mode to check out the overall colour and see how it fits in. Yeah, I'm really happy with that. I think the car park boxes off the big asset really nice, and it looks like one big development, doesn't it? Very good. Happy days. The terraforming here is very straightforward. It's just a case of picking a lower level in the water and using the flat terrain tool. You can play about with the depths and see what looks good. Now for the dry dock, So a dry dock's where a ship would be taken out of the water for repair, or in fact it could be the place where the ship is constructed. If you guys are building on your own, you need to be very careful with the terraforming. Keep in mind, if you only have a quay wall there, the water will run straight through it, okay? And it will flood the working area. So you need to keep a reasonable bit of terrain within the dock area for it to work and stay dry. Once you've got your terraforming in, just use the surface tool with whatever your preferred surface is and give it that concrete look. So let's pop our ships in and tidy things up a little bit. And that's looking an awful lot more like a shipyard now, isn't it, with the boats and the ships in? Yep, getting something in those docks makes quite a big difference. I tried spamming in some commercial and industry to see what it looked like. It really did not look good, so I'll come back to this and we'll have some more thoughtful placement of assets later on. It's a real shame the industry stuff looks so bad with the chimneys when they zone in, because there are some really nice individual assets here, but a bit more control over what goes down here really does make a huge difference with the overall look of the area. Anyway, we'll come back to these. Before moving on to a session of detailing, we'll require some surface work. We'll concrete up the dock, we'll add a mine area, and take advantage of the built-in surface tool there. We'll expand some of the car park areas, and we'll also add some dirt near the train tracks, given those red lines that you'll see. Now that we've got a lot of the surfaces in, along with some of the smaller assets, it's resembling more of a complete and realistic build. I really like the oil assets behind the warehouse car park. As this area grows, we should be able to build around that area quite nicely. I definitely don't love the zoned industry at the back, and as I said earlier, we'll come back and that will definitely need to be worked on. But next up, I'd like to expand and frame off the dock on the far left of the build, and once that's in, I want to dive into our first proper detailing session. I want to mirror the assets found on the other side of the railways, so let's pop all of these in. I'll make sure the colours match later. I want to create a block, so again, same asset, same colour, and we'll box off a set of 6 of these within the roads, and they should sit in quite nicely. I also want to introduce another big cargo warehouse to contrast against the row we created earlier. Now with a little bit of car park, some hedges and a bit of vegetation, we can move on to the big detailing effort. I'll give you a quick rundown on the detailing props used here. We'll be using the cargo containers, boxes, fences, piles of sand with a few rubble props, and we'll also be taking advantage of the barrels and the vehicle trailers. Just keep in mind, if you are going to try and plop down some of the actual vehicles themselves, they'll quite often crash the game, so avoid them, but the trailers seem to be okay. The detailing will take a couple of minutes, so sit back and enjoy. with a chunk of that detailing done, I also took a bit of time bulldozing that generic industry at the back, and we replaced it with some of the ploppable assets instead. So I've just used the warehouse assets. Along that block of zoning that I amended, I also stretched out a simple custom car park to fill that gap, and it certainly fits in better. Again, we can kind of add some more props and whatnot to that later on, and we'll get it fitting in a little bit more naturally later on in the video. As I said earlier, this is my first time using the car park function in dev mode, and as usual, rather than just starting things small, I went big, and why not? There's a ton of parking assets in here to use, and you can get really creative. Just search for parking in the asset list. So here I've boxed in the big L-shaped warehouse, and in terms of the props used here, I used the industrial fencing, parking signs, the kiosks. There's decals in here for disabled parking, no parking, service areas, and all that good stuff. There's electric charging stations too, so we'll make most of those. There's really is all sorts to choose from here as we near the end of the build, and I'll look to wrap things up with a little bit of vegetation, some hedges, some trees, and we'll give it a better, more rounded, realistic look. So this is the last of the detailing session here, guys, and then there'll be a few finishing touches to put in place. There's still a few opportunities for little pockets of trees. We'll fill a few gaps, and we'll generally add a couple more assets and give it a once over and see if there's anything else we can improve on. So after we've got all of this stuff in place, we'll do a quick build review, and we'll run through what we've done, and yeah, give it a quick once over. Alright then, so let's review what we have here. So on the left hand side of the build, we've got a few clusters of repeated warehouse assets. We've created blocks and rows around the big cargo warehouse and the rail access. We've introduced a little bit of change of elevation on some of the assets here, which sets them off against some of the surrounding buildings, which works really nice. The dry dock we created here I think helps break up the repetition of the wet docks, and it helps give this side of the development a unique look. From the point of view from the back of the red roof buildings here, we can see a few bits of greenery plopped directly on the assets, along with a small hedge tree area, and that gives the impression that the assets actually have a bit more detail than you might expect, and I really like this. I think it turned out pretty well. Here you can see the mirrored assets either side of the rail tracks, and that uniformity is broken up by a few ore and a few office assets. Yeah, happy with that one as well. Now jumping over to the custom L-shaped building, you can see the detail put into the car park. It took an awful long time to get this one done, but I think it's totally worth it. Lots of prop use on this one, as you can see, and the hedge border containing the oaks and the spruces looks pretty cool as well. I think that's helped soften up the area quite a bit, which is welcome. The substation tucked in at the back seems like a natural fit, doesn't it? And especially beside the electrical vehicle chargers, I think that's a nice addition. Behind the car park, I've allowed some generic industry to grow in. I can live with a couple of chimneys. It's not too bad if they don't pop up absolutely everywhere. But we can detail this a bit. A little bit of surface painter, some barriers, a few barrels, and a bit of fencing to box it off, and it can look pretty good. I've chucked in some bus and fire services in here for now. The fire station can stay in there, but we need to find another placement for that one, I reckon, a little bit later on. Probably do that off camera. Looking over to the cruise ship in for repair, it gives a pretty good overview of that side of the build, and once we get past the twin cargo rail warehouses, we can get onto a decent bit of detail, and plenty of barrels and trailers on show here, and they round off the car park element of that section quite nicely. The remaining docks contain plenty of points of interest, lots of props here, boxes, containers, fencing, rubble, and of course the custom style buildings created with the overlapping technique with the Anarchy mod is pretty nice. And rounding off the build with the ploppable industry assets and a bit more generic industry in the back corner here, there's a simple linear car park created, and I've just simply boxed it off with a fence and a few added signs for a pretty simple effect. I am a fan of these overlapping buildings at the back. It creates a pretty nice effect, doesn't it? So lots of work in this one. I'm super happy with the result. If you've enjoyed it, please drop a comment and a like. It really does help, obviously, guys. It would be very much appreciated. Obviously, if you're not subscribed, now's the time. The next video is going to be heavy on the detailing as well. There's some custom stuff on here which I think is looking really pretty good. I think you'll enjoy, so keep an eye out for that. Gonna leave you a few cinematics. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I appreciate you all. Take care.